They didn't ask for his permission. One moment Leo Grant was on his way home from the night shift, and the next, he was waking up under cold lights in a room that hummed like a spaceship dream gone wrong. The walls gleamed, too clean to be human. The air smelled like steel and ozone. He tried to sit up, but something cool pressed against his temple. A scanner? A restraining field? Whatever it was, it beeped once, then faded. Subject 672 awake, a voice said overhead, flat and artificial. Leo blinked against the brightness. What? A door slid open with a hiss, and in walked the most surreal figure he'd ever seen. She was tall, graceful, with skin the color of spring leaves and eyes like golden glass. Her hair was black, blunt cut just to her shoulders, swaying with each step. But it wasn't her exotic features that stunned him, it was the outfit, barely their fabrics clinging to a body sculpted like an alien goddess, all framed by a long, crisp white lab coat. Like a doctor from a sci-fi fever dream. She stopped at the foot of his cot, glancing down at a sleek daytop ad. Leo Grant. Age 32. Occupation, freelance mechanic. No spouse. No dependents. Arrest record, minor. No military training. Glad to see my resume still gets around, Leo said, rubbing his eyes. Look, if this is some weird hospital, I'm suing. Her gaze didn't shift. You are currently inside the Alterian Harmony Research Facility? Aliens? You're serious? I am Dr. Lyra Van Oris, she said, fingers dancing across the daytop ad. Lead researcher in interspecies integration. You are here because you were selected as a prime candidate for our ongoing compatibility trials. Leo tried to process that, then pointed at her lab coat. You're telling me you run experiments dressed like that? She glanced up, expression unreadable. This uniform is designed for optimal movement and sensory monitoring. Sure. And I wear tank tops to help me fix air vents. Your sarcasm is noted. She turned and walked away. Leo, still dazed, had no choice but to follow. The hallway they entered was smooth, metallic, and utterly alien. Symbols he couldn't read lined the walls, pulsing faintly with blue light. They passed by translucent chambers where other humans lay inside, monitored, scanned, some conscious, others asleep. Leo glanced sideways at Lyra. So, what? You study humans for sport? For science? Right. Totally different. They stopped at a doorway marked only with a glowing symbol. Lyra pressed her palm against the wall, and it slid open to reveal a room that looked halfway between a luxury suite and a sterile exam chamber. A large screen showed serene earth landscapes, forests, beaches, open skies. There was a bed, a desk, and a single chair bolted to the floor. This is your assigned living unit, Lyra said. You will remain here outside of testing hours. Leo eyed the glowing red band above the doorway. That a tracker? A passive biometric scanner. For your safety. For my safety, he echoed. Got it. She turned to leave but paused. You may have questions. Yeah, like what the hell is going on? You'll be briefed during your first session. Tomorrow. 0800 hours. She turned to go again. "Hey, wait," Leo said. "Why me?" She stopped but didn't turn around. Her voice was softer this time. "Because you're already more compatible than anyone we've seen." Leo stared at her retreating figure, trying to wrap his head around the absurdity. She moved like logic incarnate, but something about her, a hesitation in her voice, a glance that lingered a beat too long, told him this wasn't just science anymore. He was being studied, sure. But she wasn't immune either. And tomorrow? Tomorrow was going to change everything. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and something sweeter, a citrus-tinged scent that Leo couldn't place. It wasn't unpleasant, just strange. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the sterile testing chamber, arms crossed over the front of the slate gray uniform they'd given him. He looked around, half expecting some alien machine to lurch out from the wall and demand his blood type. Dr. Lyra Van Oris entered like a whisper. Her footsteps made no sound on the smooth floor, but her presence filled the space instantly. Her shoulder-length black hair swung slightly as she moved toward the console. The lab coat she wore drifted behind her like a cape, and underneath it he tried not to look too long. Her outfit still defied expectations of scientific attire. Leo didn't comment this time. "Vitals baseline recorded," she said, eyes never leaving the transparent display hovering in front of her. "You will undergo a preliminary physiological assessment. This includes exposure to variable stimuli and environmental triggers." Leo scratched the back of his neck. "That your fancy way of saying you're gonna poke me with glowing things and see what twitches?" "Essentially." A slim mechanical arm extended from the ceiling, blinking softly in green light. Lyra adjusted a few settings, then nodded toward the padded recliner in the middle of the room. "Please sit." He did, not without hesitation. The chair molded to his shape with a subtle hum. "First, thermal calibration." The mechanical arm swept a scanner along his body. The temperature in the room dropped slightly, then rose, then dropped again. Leo felt the changes like whispers against his skin. The display flickered with data. Heart rate, skin conductivity, micromuscle responses. "Pulse is stable," she noted. "Stress markers within human range. Slightly elevated. Probably because I woke up in an alien spa/prison." She didn't respond. A new panel extended, emitting a faint pulse of low-frequency sound. It passed through Leo like a deep vibration, making the hairs on his arms stand up. "Sound sensitivity," Lyra murmured. "Response noted." She moved closer, scanning the readout. As she leaned over the console, the sleeve of her coat brushed lightly against his forearm. The contact was fleeting, accidental, but Leo felt it like a jolt. His vitals spiked. He knew it. The scanner knew it. Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. "You flinched. You touched me. The fabric of my coat grazed your skin. That should not cause." She paused, glancing back at the display. "This?" She walked in a slow circle around him, as if trying to see what was different about him from every other test subject. Leo tried to play it cool, but his chest rose a bit faster than it should have. "Do you feel discomfort?" "No." "Pain?" "No." "Stimulation?" Leo paused. "Define stimulation." She finally looked him in the eyes. Any heightened awareness, tingling, unusual perception of physical contact? He smirked. Well, Doc, when you say it like that, it sounds like a trick question. Her gaze didn't waver. Answer honestly. He exhaled. Yeah. Maybe. Just a little. She nodded once, curtly, and noted something on the data pad. Noted anomaly. We will retest under isolation conditions. Wait. That was an anomaly. Lyra tilted her head slightly. In previous trials, baseline subjects do not react as strongly to minor environmental contact. Especially not without external chemical influence. Leo rubbed his palms along his thighs. Guess I'm just special. She didn't smile, but she did pause. Or unstable. Time will determine which. The next tests involved light patterns, simulated rainfall, and ambient field shifts. Each was designed to measure subconscious responses. But no matter what they did, the same pattern emerged. Leo's reactions were within human norms, until Lyra came close. Every time she adjusted a sensor near him or reached across his body, the monitors responded. He noticed. She noticed. But neither of them spoke about it. The final test involved proximity. A sphere hovered above them, projecting a mild magnetic resonance field. Lyra stepped into the space beside him, holding a small device. You will remain still, she said. You're coming closer. Should I be worried? The device will monitor your neural activity as I approach. No contact will occur. Got it. She moved to within half a meter. The field shifted. The readings jumped. She stepped closer. Leo felt the air change. Not warmer, not colder. Just different. Like the moment before lightning hits. You are responding again. Not my fault, he muttered. You're the one standing there radiating science. She studied him for a long moment, then quietly deactivated the field. Session complete, she said. But her voice was softer now. Less clinical. Leo stood, stretching. So, what's the verdict, Doc? Am I dying, mutating, or just hot for aliens? She glanced over her shoulder. You're not dying. Not mutating either, huh? Unclear. He grinned. And the last one? She didn't answer. He watched her leave the room, data pad in hand, lab coat trailing behind her. And for the first time since arriving, Leo didn't feel like a prisoner. He felt like a variable she couldn't predict. Leo sat quietly in the middle of the diagnostics chamber, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest of the reclining chair. He'd learned not to ask too many questions. It was easier that way. The scans, the machines, the endless calibrations, they all blurred into the background noise of his strange new reality. But today felt different. The air held a charge he couldn't explain. Dr. Lyra Van Oris entered with her usual precise steps. Her lab coat shimmered under the ambient lighting, and the soft sway of her black hair framed a face as unreadable as ever. But Leo noticed the slight pause in her stride when she looked at him. Just a flicker, but it was there. We're moving to neural resonance mapping, she said, her voice crisp, controlled. Sounds fun. You will be fitted with a synaptic alignment band. The goal is to measure shared cognitive frequencies between species. So, we're syncing brains now. At a non-invasive level. She handed him a thin metallic circlet. Leo took it, turning it over in his hands. Looks like a Lyra. It is a calibrated neural interface. Still a Lyra. Place it on your head. He did, the metal cool against his skin. She attached a second band to her own temples, then stepped closer. A soft chime indicated the devices had linked. You will maintain eye contact for the duration of the scan. Leo tilted his head. That's it. No zapping. No memory wipes. Just eye contact. He settled back. This might be the easiest test yet. Lyra took her position in front of him, standing only a foot away. Her golden eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, he was struck by how alien they were. Not just in color, but in depth, like staring into a galaxy where logic lived. The scan began with a low hum. Seconds passed. Something shifted. Leo felt his breathing change, not from nervousness, but from awareness. It wasn't just her eyes. It was the way she stood, so still and composed, yet completely present. He could feel her attention like gravity, pulling at something unspoken between them. His heart ticked faster. Across from him, Lyra's data pad blinked. She glanced at it once, frowned, then returned her gaze to his. Your sympathetic response is elevated. You don't say. Do you feel anything unusual? Define unusual. She paused. Increased emotional presence. A sense of familiarity. Physiological heat. Doc, you're describing every first date I've ever had. She didn't blink. Answer seriously. Leo exhaled slowly. Yes. I feel aware of you. For the first time, her eyes flickered. Her breath caught not visibly, but the data pad caught it. A small spike. She knew. Leo leaned slightly forward, still locked in the scan. Is it just me, or is this thing picking up more than cognitive patterns? Lyra didn't respond immediately. Her fingers hovered over the console, uncertain. That, in itself, was unusual. Her entire presence had always been precision. This was hesitation. There is a neural overlap, she admitted. Higher than projected. Meaning. Our brainwave frequencies are synchronizing faster than expected. And that's bad. Unprecedented. He studied her for a long beat. You're affected too? Her gaze dropped, briefly. My pulse rate has increased by 4%. Because of the scan? She looked up. Because of the subject. Silence settled between them. Not heavy, not awkward. Electric. The scan ended with a soft tone. The bands deactivated. But neither of them moved. Leo finally spoke. You okay, Doc? This result was not predicted. He smiled. That makes two of us. Lyra turned away, removing her band and setting it gently on the console. Her hand lingered there, as if grounding herself. It could be anomaly. Could be. Or maybe we're just two people stuck in a situation neither of us chose. She glanced back. Do you think this is emotional interference? I think it's real. Whatever you want to call it. Lyra studied him, her posture relaxing just a little. We will repeat the scan tomorrow. In a more controlled setting. Looking forward to it. He meant it. As she walked toward the exit, Leo watched her with quiet curiosity. Something had shifted. Not in the readings, not in the science, but in the silence between them. Whatever this was, it was growing. And it wasn't in the data. The lab felt smaller now. Not physically, it remained the same sterile chamber with polished floors and pulsing walls. But ever since the neural resonance test, the space between Leo and Lyra had changed. There was weight in the air, an unspoken frequency vibrating just below every word exchanged. Leo noticed it the moment she walked in that morning. She was different. Her movements were still precise, her voice still clipped with clinical focus, but her eyes lingered longer than necessary. She stood a little closer than protocol dictated. Subject 672, she began, then paused, correcting herself. Leo. We will continue with multisensory calibration. That sounds less terrifying than usual, he replied with a lopsided grin. It is a non-invasive process. It will require cooperation. That's been the theme of the week, hasn't it? She said nothing, but the edge of her mouth almost lifted. The tests that followed weren't dramatic. Light intensity exposure, scent identification, environmental preference simulations. But each segment involved interaction, closer positioning, the occasional shared glance when results were unexpected, and a growing rhythm in how they moved through each session. At one point, Lyra adjusted the position of a light filter above his head, reaching across his shoulder. Her fingers didn't touch him, but the proximity made Leo hold his breath. She noticed. You're reacting again, she said softly. So are you, he replied. Her hand froze in midair. A long second passed. Then she stepped back and typed something into the console. They both pretended it didn't happen. After the session, instead of leaving immediately, Lyra hesitated. Do you find the habitat conditions comfortable? Leo tilted his head. You're asking how I sleep now? Environmental stress can affect biological readings. It's relevant. Right. Well. I miss windows. And the food tastes like recycled air. She didn't smile, but she didn't walk away either. What do Alterians eat? He asked. We synthesize nutrient blends. Flavor is secondary. That explains a lot. Her gaze dropped for a moment, then returned to meet his. Do you wish to return home? He hesitated. I don't know what home is anymore. The words hung between them, heavier than either expected. The next day, she called him into a chamber designed for memory stimulation. Holographic projections surrounded them with lifelike clarity, scenes pulled from Leo's subconscious, a beach at sunset, the roar of a motorcycle engine, a childhood treehouse lost to time. Lyra stood in the middle of it all, watching. Not as a scientist, but as someone witnessing a life through another's eyes. These are comforting to you? She asked. They used to be. Now they are just echoes. Echoes inform who you are? He looked at her, not the projections. And what about you, Doc? Got any echoes? Altarians do not dwell on the past. That wasn't an answer. She turned slightly, the light of the sunset simulation warming her face. For a moment, she didn't look like a doctor, or an alien. Just someone, lost in something. I once lived near the Emerald Flats, she said. It was silent there. The kind of silence that wrapped around you. Not empty alive. Sounds peaceful. It was. She blinked, and the moment was gone. We should proceed. Later, as the lights dimmed and the session ended, Leo didn't move to leave immediately. You don't have to stay so distant all the time. I am your researcher. You're also a person. She didn't answer. Days passed. More tests. More glances. More hesitation. Their conversations became less formal. Leo asked questions. About Altaria. About her training. About the strange tattoos she had along her collarbone, thin, shimmering lines like circuitry. They are memory markers, she explained. Each line represents a completed phase of development. So they tell your life story. In a way. Guess I'd have a lot of blank space. She didn't argue. And when their hands brushed one day during a calibration exchange, neither of them pulled away immediately. The contact was brief, but it changed something. Neither of them spoke of it, but they didn't pretend it hadn't happened either. That evening, Lyra reviewed the session logs alone. The data was consistent. But it didn't explain her own reactions, the slight tremor in her pulse, the warmth that settled in her chest during interaction, the dreams that came unbidden afterward. Altarians weren't supposed to form attachments during trials. Emotional compromise threatened objectivity. And yet, she stood outside Leo's chamber for a full minute the next morning before opening the door. He was seated on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall screen showing a looping scene of Earth's forests. When he turned, his face lit up. "Morning, document." She said nothing. Just nodded. Something was growing between them. Something not in the charts, not in the schedule. Something neither of them could quantify. The test was supposed to be routine. Lyra had calibrated the sensors herself. Triple-checked the parameters. There was no margin for deviation. Everything about the upcoming session was designed for clarity, control, and consistency. Yet as soon as Leo stepped into the chamber, something shifted. He wasn't doing anything unusual. Just walking, breathing, watching her with that same casual ease that had become his signature. But even before the scan began, the ambient vitals monitor pulsed in warning yellow. His heart rate was elevated, neural activity erratic, not in a dangerous way, but in a way Lyra couldn't explain. "Take a seat," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. Leo raised an eyebrow. "You okay, Doc? You look like someone reprogrammed your coffee." She ignored the comment. "Please sit." The scanner descended. The diagnostics suite activated with a soft hum, lights dancing across Leo's frame. The readouts populated in seconds, then began to shift fast. Faster than they should. "Your endocrine markers are elevated," she said, scrolling through the data. Cortisol, dopamine, oxytocin. Leo smirked. Sounds like I'm in love. She glanced at him sharply. But it wasn't just his usual sarcasm that unsettled her. It was the spike that followed right as he said it. Like his body believed it, even if he didn't. She moved to the secondary console and isolated the readings. You're aware this is not a romantic environment. I'm surrounded by metal walls and a glowing table. Trust me, I've noticed. She focused on a neural scan. Something was off. His cortical stimulation was mirroring hers. Not entirely, not perfectly, but enough to raise a warning flag. Emotional synchronization at this depth only occurred in deeply bonded pairs, familial, sometimes romantic, but always rare. Lyra checked the machine. No errors. No misreads. This wasn't the first time she'd seen strange results with him. But now the trend was impossible to ignore. Do you feel drawn to me? She asked, before she could stop herself. Leo blinked. That's not exactly a question I expected from my alien lab supervisor. Answer it. He paused. Then, honestly, yeah. I do. I don't know why. And I know I shouldn't. But I do. She felt it then. A soft pulse in her chest echoed in the data. Her own vitals steady before were climbing now, mimicking his. Her fingers curled slightly at her side. This wasn't just data. This was interference. She stepped back, shaking her head. You need to leave the chamber. Leo stood but didn't move toward the door. You're reacting too? I'm not your subject. No, he said gently. You're something else. And I think that scares you. She didn't respond. She was staring at the overlapping graphs on a display. Twin pulses. Two minds, syncing in real time. This doesn't make sense, she whispered. No pairing has ever displayed this kind of convergence across species. It's not in any of the literature. Maybe we're writing new literature, Leo said. With bad jokes and awkward silences. She almost smiled. Almost. But the fear returned quickly. If the oversight board saw this data, they'd quarantine the subject. Reassign her. Erase what was already happening between them under the guise of correctional science. She needed time. I'm suspending the session, she said, powering down the interface. Leo looked like he wanted to say more but didn't. He turned and walked out quietly. Lyra stood alone in the room, watching the last traces of his biometric signature fade from the screen. Later, she reviewed the full logs. The numbers weren't just high. They were adaptive. Leo's body was responding to her presence with alarming consistency, and now, her own data was beginning to reflect the same pattern. She'd checked every variable, recalibrated every sensor. It wasn't equipment failure. It was them. She stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. Until they stopped looking like numbers and started looking like a warning. She wasn't supposed to care. And yet, with every test, she was slipping. Not because of weakness. Because something in him resonated with something in her, and the more she tried to isolate it, the louder it became. This wasn't attraction. It was recognition. Of something rare. Of something dangerous. Of something that didn't belong in a lab. Lyra sat alone in the observation chamber, staring at the dim console. The biometric logs from Leo's last session hovered before her, silently cycling through their endless stream of numbers and pulses and unreadable variables. But she wasn't watching them anymore. Not really. She was watching herself. Not the professional. Not the Lyra lead researcher. But the woman behind the protocol. The one who hadn't slept a full night in days. The one who no longer trusted her own neutrality. The reflection in the console glass revealed tired eyes, a clenched jaw, and a thin tension in her posture that refused to ease. Her lab coat was perfectly fastened, every button aligned, and yet she felt unraveling at the seams. Leo Grant. She had reviewed his file more than a dozen times. Human male. Mechanic. Limited education. Unremarkable, statistically speaking. And yet, he defied every known model. His readings weren't just inconsistent. They were personal. They followed patterns she recognized not in theory, but in herself. She should have reported it. She should have flagged the data. She hadn't. Not because she wanted to protect him, but because she wasn't ready to admit that it mattered. That he mattered. That every time he looked at her with that lazy smile and said something ridiculous, something in her physiology shifted. Lyrians didn't bond with test subjects. Especially not humans. It wasn't prejudice. It was design. But design didn't explain the warmth she felt in her chest when he leaned just a little too close. Or the way her pulse jumped when he said her name like it wasn't just a title. Or the quiet clarity she felt during their shared silences, as if no translation protocol could truly capture the meaning of those moments. She reached for her data pad, fingers trembling just enough to betray her control. A part of her wanted to erase everything. Wipe the scans. Reset the trials. Pretend it never happened. But she knew it wouldn't help. The problem wasn't in the data. It was in her. Every time she tried to look at Leo like a subject, he found a way to remind her that he wasn't. That he saw her too. Not the doctor. Not the alien. Just her. And that terrified her more than any scientific anomaly. Because if she let this continue, if she acknowledged even a fraction of what was building between them, she would lose everything. Her credibility. Her post. Her purpose. She had spent her entire career proving she could be objective. That she could serve the Harmony Initiative without error or distraction. But Leo had never read her performance scores. He only ever asked if she was okay. She stood abruptly, pacing the room. The silence clung to her like static. Every echo of her footsteps reminded her she was still here. Still in control. Barely. Her COMM beeped. A message from the Oversight Unit, status update requested on Subject 672. She didn't respond. Instead, she closed her eyes and tried to remember the flats of her home world. The stillness. The way time felt slower there. More deliberate. It wasn't enough. Her mind drifted again to the memory simulation chamber, to Leo watching the waves of an Earth ocean he hadn't seen in years. to the quiet way he'd said, "I don't know what home is anymore." Neither did she. She reopened the logs, scrolled through them one last time. The convergence was real. His vitals, her response, the synchronization, the feedback loops. It wasn't coincidence. And maybe it wasn't just science. She needed to make a decision. Continue the research, and risk everything. Or terminate the trials and walk away. Both choices felt like betrayal. The only thing worse was silence. She exited the chamber and walked the long corridor to Leo's living unit. Every step echoed like a countdown. She paused outside his door. Her hand hovered over the panel. She didn't press it. Instead, she whispered to no one, "What are you doing to me?" And the answer came, not from data, not from instinct, but from her own heartbeat, echoing his rhythm. Lyra didn't sleep that night. Not because of the data. Not even because of the looming consequences. She didn't sleep because every time she closed her eyes, she saw his. She watched the sunless morning rise over the artificial lights of the research dome, standing at the edge of the observation platform with her coat wrapped tightly around her. The facility was silent, save for the distant hum of energy cycling through the walls. But inside her, nothing was still. She had spent the night revisiting every trial, every anomaly, every lingering glance that never should have happened. And now, standing there, she wasn't a scientist making a breakthrough. She was a woman making a choice. She tapped into the private access node reserved for senior researchers. Her clearance gave her everything. Internal logs, transfer routes, escape paths, even the override codes to erase her own presence if it came to that. She hesitated only once. Then she began typing. Later that morning, Leo found her waiting in his chamber. She wasn't holding a data pad. There were no scanners. No diagnostics. Just her. He froze in the doorway. Something wrong. She looked at him like she was trying to memorize the moment. Everything's wrong. But that doesn't mean it has to stay that way. He stepped closer, reading the tension in her shoulders. "You're not here to run tests, are you?" She shook her head. "I'm here to end them." He didn't smile. "Not yet." "What does that mean?" Lyra's voice lowered. "They'll find out soon. About the synchronization. About me. About you. Once the oversight unit connects the patterns, they'll shut this entire project down and reassign you somewhere you won't remember your name. And you. I'll be deleted from protocol. Quietly. Efficiently." He studied her, gaze soft. "You could still walk away. You could file your report, call it interference. Blame the tech. I don't want to lie anymore." He stepped closer. "Then what do you want?" She looked at him, truly looked, like she was finally allowing herself to answer. "I want a place where I can choose what I feel. Without protocol. Without oversight. Without pretending this isn't real." For a moment, neither of them breathed. Then Leo nodded once. "Okay. What do we do?" She handed him a compact data crystal. It's everything. Your records. My notes. Backup of the sync logs. If we disappear, they'll scrub you from the system. But this will prove we existed. He held it gently. You sure about this, Doc? Her voice was steady. Call me Lyra. He smiled then. Okay, Lyra. Lead the way. They moved fast. Lyra used a maintenance corridor that bypassed the main security routes. Her code overrode most of the locks. For the rest, Leo helped rewiring panels with quiet confidence, fingers moving like he'd done this 1,000 times. Maybe not here, but survival was survival. They reached the shuttle bay 2 hours later. A secondary transport drone, normally used for supply runs, was docked and idle. She activated it, inputting coordinates to a hidden outpost listed only under experimental classifications. A place no one looked. A place where no one asked questions. As the engines began to hum, she turned to him. Once we leave orbit, there's no coming back. Then we make wherever we land worth it. Lyra hesitated. Just for a second. Then she nodded. They boarded. The hatch sealed behind them. As the drone lifted into the dark, artificial sky of the Harmony facility, Lyra felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Below, in the heart of the lab, alerts began to ping. Unauthorized access. Data breach. One subject missing. One researcher off path. But by the time the alarms reached Central Command, they were already gone. She sat beside him in a small shuttle cabin, watching the stars begin to emerge. You scared? He asked. Terrified. Me too. He reached over, and for once, she didn't flinch. She took his hand. And didn't let go. The stars outside the viewport looked different now. Not just beautiful, not just vast. They looked like freedom. Leo sat beside Lyra in the shuttle's narrow cockpit, watching as the last glimmers of the Harmony research facility faded into the blackness behind them. Neither of them spoke for a while. There was no need. The silence between them was no longer heavy, it was shared, understood, peaceful. They didn't know exactly where they were going. The outpost Lyra had chosen was remote, buried in a planetary belt that had long been flagged as irrelevant to any major civilization. That was exactly the point. She leaned forward, checking the navigation systems, her expression calm for the first time in days. Leo glanced at her, studying the way her green skin caught the reflected starlight, the way her shoulders had dropped just slightly as if the weight she carried had finally lessened. We'll need to establish a cover identity, she said softly. No broadcasting, no scans. I've been off the grid before, he replied. But never for the right reasons. She turned to him. And this is the right reason? He smiled. If it wasn't, you wouldn't be here? She didn't argue. When they landed, the outpost was even more isolated than he expected. Nestled between jagged stone ridges, it had the skeletal remains of an old weather station, now reprogrammed for habitation. The structures were modest, nothing sleek, nothing advanced. Just enough. That was what they needed. Lyra adapted quickly. She rerouted the station's power core, repurposed its internal AI to monitor for surveillance threats instead of data collection. Within hours, the place felt less like an empty shell and more like a possibility. Leo brought in the last crate of supplies from the shuttle and dropped it beside the door frame. Not bad for two fugitives. We're not fugitives, she said. He raised a brow. Pretty sure that's what they call it when you run away with government property? Then let them call it what they want. We're alive. We're not hiding. We're choosing. He liked that. They set up a living space together. Shared the same room, the same silence, the same sunrise through tinted glass each morning. The outpost had no clocks, no external schedules. Time moved the way they wanted it to. And yet, something lingered. One evening, Leo stood at the edge of a small ledge outside the structure, arms crossed, staring up at the violet-hued sky. Lyra stepped out beside him, folding her arms across her chest. "You miss Earth?" she asked. "Sometimes. The food. The noise. The feeling that you're just one among billions. And now." He looked at her. "Now I feel like I matter. Not to a system. Not to a study. Just here. With you." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her presence beside him was enough. Inside, their small shared space became a sanctuary. There were no test results on the walls. No scanners. No charts. Just a low table with mismatched chairs. A narrow bed. Blank walls waiting for something new. Lyra eventually removed her lab coat. Folded it neatly. Placed it in a sealed drawer. She never took it out again. One night, Leo found her reviewing something on her personal console. Not research. Not logs. Art. Digital sketches, rendered in alien brush strokes, images of stars, curves of bone and skin, half-formed visions of a world that hadn't existed yet. "You made these?" he asked. "Before. When I thought I had to forget that I was more than just a title." He stared at the glowing shapes. "They are beautiful." She closed the file and turned to him. "You reminded me. Life wasn't perfect." There were still whispers in Lyra's mind, echoes of what they left behind. But she no longer felt afraid of them. And Leo, for all his sarcasm and half-smiles, carried his own ghosts. But here, those ghosts had no voice. Weeks passed. Then one morning, Lyra stepped outside and found Leo on the roof, making adjustments to a crude signal dish he'd assembled from salvage. "What is that?" she asked. He looked over his shoulder. "Something that won't send a message. Just receive. In case someone out there is trying to listen. And if they find us, then we'll deal with it. Together." She climbed up beside him, sat down cross-legged. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of metallic dust and fresh solar air. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "No." He nodded. "Me neither." They sat like that until the sun crested the ridge. No alarms. No schedules. Just two people who had once been labeled as data points, now living like something far simpler. Human. Alive. Free.